Welcome to welcome to geopolitics in conflict. Breaking news once again. What's going on, Elizabeth?
What's going on?
I know a
That's a
lot, huh?
there's a lot going on,
Indeed,
but
indeed.
that's a great question, and thank you, David, for asking it. But what's going on that I think is particularly interesting. I'm so interested in it. I'm like
The
getting really
topic.
excited.
Yeah.
But Ray Dalio, who, love him or hate him, he just wrote an article that
Hmm.
he put on LinkedIn, and it's called The Changing World Order, The New Paradigm. And I wanted to go over this article because, quite frankly, it's a lot of what we've been talking about.
Hmm.
So that the way that he outlines it is that in his perspective, there are three main things that are contributing or causing basically the world order to shift around. And
Okay.
the world sort of as we know it change fairly drastically. And one of the things that he talks about is that this has actually happened a bunch of times throughout history, and we know that to be true. We know that, there was the great British colonies. France used to be on top. There are very many other countries who used to sort of be on top, and now the paradigm is changing again. The US was on top, but we're seeing this huge rise
Okay.
of China.
Yeah.
And there's a lot in here. So let's dive right into
Great.
some of the things that he says.
So, what is the first one?
The
Um,
first thing that he brings up in terms of, what's causing this new global order, what's causing this paradigm shift. And the first thing is, he says it's big debt and debt monetization, particularly in the world's reserve currency, which is the US dollar.
US dollar.
So I want to show this chart because the most important thing, he's an investor, right? And of course, all of these are property of Bridgewater and of Ray Dalio, but I think these are really good charts, so I wanted to show them to you. The
Hmm.
most important thing that I want to point out right here is this money supply surge. So the United States has been printing money like wild. And we see the results of it, right? We see the inflation, we see the massive debt spiral that the United States is in right now. But the
Hmm.
United States isn't alone
I
in
know other
the world.
countries do too. Yeah.
Right.
But at least for us in the US, we printed so much for the last 3 years or so. I found
Right.
some stats that indicates that almost 40% we printed so much money that even if you go
Right.
back to the beginning of the United States, we have never accumulated that much debt. So we end up
Right.
printing so much.
Yeah, and that's the stats that I find also, is that we've printed about 40% of
Percent.
all money. All
Wow.
money that
Wow.
was printed in the last, I think it was year, 2 years.
Exactly.
And that is a result of, we all know what's been going on.
Exactly.
That's been the result of the government's reaction to what's been going on. So that's a huge factor. But
Yeah.
what's happening is that as this money is being printed,
Hmm.
people have more money. There's more money obviously circulating, but it's worth less. So, that's why people's income can go up, but their buying power is dropping. So
Yeah.
he talks about a bunch of things in here, but really the big thing is that it's not smart to own cash. If you're an investor, it's not necessarily smart to own cash and or bonds for that matter.
Hmm.
And that really, to keep your purchasing power, you kind of have to actively be investing. And that's a big thing because in the United States and in most of the world, and I don't see most people investing. I see a small percentage
Yeah.
of people who really understand investment investing, but the rest of everybody else, is
Yeah.
keeping their cash in the bank.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you a question about that one. So is that apply also to if you keep your money in a bank, you will be losing?
Yeah. So, first of all, I'm not an economist and I'm not an investor, and none of this is investment advice. I'm just,
Yeah, we're just
I
talking
just pay
here. Yeah,
attention to
yeah,
what's
you're
going
right.
on. So, that out of
Hmm.
the way. So, you're not getting interest. or it's extremely
Oh,
low for
okay.
keeping your money in the bank. So if inflation, and the government said and the Fed said inflation was transitory, well, now it turns out it's not
No.
transitory. Oh, it's 2%. Oh, wait, maybe it's more than that. So there's no bank account, I think, that you could possibly find that'll give you the same amount in interest
Mhm.
that inflation is growing. So ultimately you're losing purchasing power. But this is really complex, so I don't want to dive too far into it.
You're right. You're right.
But yeah, so there is purchasing power that gets lost just because of the nature of inflation, and the fact that you're not getting any interest, and so
Interest
your
on that.
money is just kind of sitting there, and it's
Losing
becoming
value,
less
right?
than exactly,
Is
it's
losing
becoming
value.
less and less valuable.
Uh,
The next thing that I actually
mhm.
want to point out, so we know that printing money, we know that this debt situation is not sustainable. And in the interview that we're going to release with Greg Foss tomorrow, we talked about, can the United States come back from the amount of debt that there is? And his take was no, the
Mm.
United States cannot come back from that. So ultimately, his take was that fiat currency is going to fail. And he
Mm.
pointed to, historically, all fiat currencies fail. So we talk about Bitcoin, and
Yeah.
Bitcoin being the solution to that.
Yeah.
But the next thing,
Hold on a second, Elizabeth. Just to add to this point that you
yeah.
mentioned, because when I read the article that Ray Dalio published, it's this exact point that you mentioned, that historically speaking, we look back then when the Gilded Dutch, used to be at the top.
Mhm.
Then comes
Right.
after it the British, the pound, then the US dollar.
Right.
So I see your point. I see your point.
All right, so let's go next into what I think is maybe the biggest issue right now, and that is the internal conflicts over wealth and value gaps.
Wow.
So let me pull up this very, very good chart where he talks about the income inequality between the top 0.01% and the top 10%, and then the bottom 90%. So
Wow.
if you look at where we are right now, there's historically been a pretty big gap, right? Except for over here in the 30s. But there's
Mm-hmm.
been if you look at this chart, there's a historically big gap between the bottom 90% owning more
Mm-hmm.
and the top 10% or the top 0.1% owning less. But look at where we are right now.
Wow. Oh
So,
my God. Wow.
and I think the truth is ultimately that people can feel that. People can feel the difference between not really owning anything, having things be sort of priced out of the everyday person's ability to pay for them.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about electricity going up, gas prices going up. If you're part of the top 10%, you don't care if gas prices go up,
Hmm.
right? But if you're part of the 90%,
90%.
you care that gas
Wow.
prices are
Hmm.
going up.
Wow. That is very indicative of where things are today in our
Mhm.
society here. And I think this is not just in the US. This is on global level.
Right. It is. It
Wow.
is definitely at the global level. So that's a really big problem, and it's something that we talk about on this channel all the time. All right. The next thing that I want to talk about is that he brings up is the conservative versus, so basically Republican versus Democrat.
Hmm.
And this is their ideological positions and how different they are. So there's a huge gap here
Gap.
between the ideology of the conservative versus the less conservative, so Democrat and Republican. Look how far apart these ideologies
Wow.
are.
Hmm.
It's the furthest apart that it's ever been, because even here at the 1900s, it wasn't this far apart, or it's close, right? But it
Yeah.
wasn't as far. So, you're looking at the two-party system that we
Mhm.
have right now being completely polarized, being on opposite ends of the spectrum. And we can see that here. There are very clear differences between red states and blue states, and a lot of the policies that have been enacted over the last 2 years,
Yeah.
I think, have exacerbated that to a really extreme position.
Yeah.
I think that there's a huge divide between the Republicans and the Democrats in this country. And, in my personal opinion, I actually feel like both are two sides of the same coin.
Same coin. You're right.
But that's the politicization. I'm
There
sorry,
we go.
guys.
You got it. You got it.
Wow. Of almost every topic, it's either one end of the spectrum or the other. And you can see that reflected in this chart here. But when you have two parties that are this opposed
Yeah.
in what they want, I think this is set up for something not great.
Can I use the term chaos?
I think so. It's, human nature, people want to belong to something.
That's true.
And, even if they don't necessarily everything that, so I think that's part of
So sort of torpedoed everything the Democrats were hoping for, and all of a sudden they are now on the opposite ends, Republicans and Democrats, and that's exactly to your point, that the graph reflects that through the policies emanating from Congress. So,
yeah, and when it's so divided, it's really hard for anything to get done.
yeah.
And you pit people who are all part of the same country against each other, and that's not healthy. That's not a healthy way forward. But a lot of our viewers, you guys ask, what's happening in the United States with, do people know about this political thing, or do people know about this political thing? Well, the truth is that there is a lot of clashing that's going on right now between these two political parties. And there's a lot of vilification. So, one side says the other side is the reason for all of their problems.
Yeah.
And that's unreasonable at best.
Yeah, because then nobody's willing to sit down and have an open and honest conversation. It's because if you express your opinion, or you state the facts, or you say the truth, and the other party doesn't like it, you become the enemy. And since when have we become like this? That's the sad part. That's very sad.
And so the next part of this is something that we actually talked about in the Elon Musk video, and that is taxation. Because of the government debt spiral, because of the amount of debt that the US government has right now, they're raising taxes. And, part of Build Back Better, I think, was in the budget for, don't quote me on this exact number, but I think it was 87,000 new IRS tax agents, basically.
It was around that number, Elizabeth. Yeah.
Which is huge.
Huge.
That's absolutely huge. And the argument was saying that was for the wealthiest people, but that's the wealthiest people have their own, they have their own set of tax people who handle just them. So that was basically for everybody else. That was for us. But the issue is that even if you taxed all the billionaires in the world 100%, it still would not cover even a drop of what the national debt is.
No.
Even if you took all their money away and used it for taxes, it would not touch the amount of debt that we have.
Exactly.
So the average person is also getting taxed higher and higher. But even if you tax the average person 100%, it wouldn't touch that debt either. So there's not enough taxes in this country to pay off that debt, which is why money printing is a really big thing. All right. So the last part is external conflicts, most importantly, the rise of a great power, China, to the existing great power, the US. And David, I think you
Wow.
can speak to this a
Mm.
lot. David, are you there? Guys, I think we may have lost David.
Yeah,
No,
we got
you're
cut off, but we're
there.
back. We're back. We're back.
Okay.
Yeah, it went out for a second. So I didn't hear the last part, Elizabeth. What was the
Uh,
last part
the
you
last
said?
part is basically that the United States, which is the current great power, is getting replaced
Mm-hmm.
by China, which is the up and coming great power. And I said
Yeah.
you would have a lot to talk about in that regard. And I wanted to share with you this chart that Ray Dalio also has, and that is the it's the rise and fall of empires over the
Mm-hmm.
last 500-ish years.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can see that it happened with the Dutch. Well, the Chinese were up here. The Chinese is in red. The Dutch, and then
Yeah,
they fell, and then the British, and then they fell, and now the United States. And you can see the rise of China it's inevitable.
that's correct. Yeah, well, that's part of that geopolitical change or the dynamics that is. What's interesting about that is that the financial aspects is one of the tools of how you gauge a country's ascendancy to or ascent to great power, shall we say. So what we are witnessing right now with the usually in the West we use the term rise of China, usually is the rejuvenation because
Right.
in China, that's the term they use. In the West, we use the term rise because some of us, not all, I shall not generalize, of course, are not familiar with China's history. This is why we use the terms that they are familiar into the context of the culture in the West here. So yeah, geopolitically speaking, that change in the dynamics, the monetary aspects of it plays a role into that. Like you mentioned earlier, with the idea of the Dutch. The guild was the
Mhm.
currency. Then after that became the British pound. Then after that, the US dollar. And we all saw how its role was established after World War II, when the United States, the US dollar became the global currency by which the US manages, or can we use the term control the global economy, if we will?
I think
And I
so.
think we will use the term. So, and this is why the fear in the United States about are we seeing the Bretton Woods 2, in other words, another system that's going to have to be reorganized, but not to the favor of the United States. The question with that we need to ask is, will that lead to a military conflict?
Well, and I think ultimately the answer is this. So this is GDP
Mm-hmm.
for 2021. And if you look at it, the United States and China are the two biggest,
Indeed.
and
Yeah.
by far. So the United States at 22.9 trillion and China at 16.8 trillion.
Mm.
So, when you look at, is there going to be a war, for example, look at, and a lot of this goes back and forth, right? So the United States pays China for goods.
Indeed. Yeah. But what's interesting that a lot of people here in the United States do not understand, and big corporations here in the
Mm-hmm.
United States still doing business in China and will keep doing
Right.
business in China. The government, despite if you happen to be an American watching this,
Mm-hmm.
know this, because this is the truth. Whatever policies, whatever statements emanating from the White House or Washington, they are completely opposite to what the reality is.
Yes.
Yeah, it was last time Tim Cook from Apple was in China. Elon Musk has some of his stuff in China.
Yeah.
Most of the big corporations, they are doing business in China because the bottom line is the profit. And
Right. And I really love that you brought that up, because Elon Musk just opened a new Tesla store.
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
a play in Xinjiang. Sorry,
Xinjiang. Yeah.
sorry, I apologize
You
for
got it.
that
You got it.
incorrectly, but it's Xinjiang. And he's come under fire, but ultimately you're absolutely right. When we look at large corporate interests, it doesn't matter what they say.
Exactly.
What matters is that they'll follow the profits. And they are doing that. And we can see that because this a huge part of China's GDP, where does that come from? It comes from here. And
Indeed.
US companies are not changing their policies in regards to China, regardless of what the policies are making, like you just said.
That's true. And that becomes also the question of this leads me to talk about one point that we like to share with our viewers, has to do with the Thucydides trap. I don't know if you
Mm,
are familiar with this. I'm sure some of our viewers might be, or they are, they know about Thucydides trap. Well, that's usually what it is in a simple word in here, is when an emerging power tried to replace a sitting power, which
yeah.
is the true example of the United States and China. Could this lead to a war? That's
Yeah.
remain to be seen. Well, let's hope it does not. But the fact that when we take this, the source of this article coming from Ray Dalio as an
Yeah.
investor, a billionaire, you can just see the importance of understanding how much geopolitics impacts the financial market.
And you're absolutely right, because basically this entire thing is geopolitics.
Indeed. And
This
this is where people need to understand geopolitics here. Some of them said, well, this has nothing to do with me. It
Right.
does. It trickles down all the way down to the bottom.
Absolutely. And it does have everyday implications, like we're talking about inflation, for example. That's
Hmm.
an everyday thing that impacts you whether you pay attention to geopolitics or not.
Yeah. Because when
The
you go to grocery store to buy stuff, you just like a few months ago, you paid for something, let's say $10, all of a sudden it's 15. And you
Right.
said to yourself, how that happened?
Right. And it happens for geopolitical reasons. And
Exactly.
Biden talked about easing the supply chain, right? Because there
Uh-huh.
are less ships outside that were docked. And last I checked, it wasn't that there were less ships docked outside of Los Angeles and Long Beach. It's that those ships were told that if they didn't move outside of the waters that were technically considered Los Angeles or Long Beach, they would be fined. So they all moved over the horizon, so you couldn't see them anymore. And then it was
Wow.
reported that there were fewer ships docked and that the supply chain had been eased.
How the government find it convenient, because this is where manipulation is all about. They find it very convenient to an
Mhm.
average Joe, average Jane is not going to be thinking in these terms.
Right.
It gets under my skin when I hear that the government is embarking on this kind of lies, to
Yeah.
even for us here. So it's unfortunate. But I do find this very, very interesting. These 3 points you tackled,
Mhm.
they are exactly what is going on right now. And for us to understand those dynamics, how they interact with each other,
Yes.
that is the big picture that we hope to provide our viewers with. This, the whole reason why we're doing what we're doing, is to assist them with this understanding.
And speaking to what you just said, David, this we're watching this happen in real
Mm-hmm.
time, right? There is a paradigm shift that's happening. There is a shift, there is a big change in the world that's happening. And I think I don't know what's possible and what's not possible, but
Mm-hmm.
I know that with an intention to move forward, better, to
Mm-hmm.
to do better for humanity, I think we have a greater chance of getting there. So, I know that manufacturing coming back to the United States might change a lot. And I know that partnerships, like for example, politically with China, because we already have the business partnerships, they're
Mm-hmm.
already there. Whether you like them or not, whether you agree with them or not, they're
Indeed.
already there. And it doesn't matter what's being accused. What I'm sure that there are human rights violations in China. There are human rights violations all over the world. I'm sure that that's happening. But ultimately, business has chosen, and ultimately, the world is run by money. And I don't personally agree with that. I think it should be run by well-being of people, but it's not. And so I think it's important to pay attention to the shift that's happening, the way that it's happening, not the way that we want it to be, but really take a look at what's happening so that we can move forward in a way that with our eyes open. Because it's only when you really know the truth of what's going on that you can make the best decisions for yourself.
Indeed, and that was the whole objective of why we're doing what we're doing here with this channel here is, provide our viewers the best information to the best of our abilities, to the best of our knowledge. We confirm the accuracy and the truthfulness of the information before we air it out to our viewers. But also, at the end, it's up to them to decide what to take and what not to take. We can reach the conclusion for them. We are not going to reach the conclusion for anybody. But we'll provide the information and let them decide for their own. So, anything to add, Elizabeth, before we leave?
Just that I hope that this was informative, and that a lot of what we've been talking about coming from a different place, coming from Ray Dalio, like I said at the beginning, like him or hate him, he is one of the world's most successful investors, and he did that by paying attention geopolitically to what's going on in the world. And so to hear him or to see him write something like this, I felt like it was important for people to know it and to see it. And you can agree with it or not, but I wanted to make sure that you guys had this information.
Indeed. Well, like I always say, we'll present two sides of the arguments, from our guests to articles like this. We're not gonna say it to make everybody feel good. That's not what we are about. We are about the facts and the truth, and that's what we do. So just for our viewers, remember to check us out at geopolitics.local.com, because we are on locals there. And also check out our membership at geopoliticsinconflict.com. That's usually for our members. And where we have membership, you see it there at the bottom of the screen. And we're going to be doing a presentation for our members. We're preparing on it. We're working on it. And for Friday, remember to join us for our regular live stream at 1100 hours. So we look forward to seeing you all. And as always, stay informed. Till next time. Bye-bye.